I was in a hospital gown, hooked to 4 fluids, about to be wheeled into surgery, when a nurse walked in holding a beige envelope. "Your husband said to give you this before he left," she said gently. I smiled, thinking it was a love note, something encouraging for when I woke up. Until I opened it. Divorce papers. Filed yesterday. Already processed through the county clerk's office. No handwritten note.
No explanation. No apology.
Just a sticky tab marking where I should sign. Neil had already left the building. Walked out of the pre-op waiting area while I was changing into my gown. The nurse's face went pale when she saw what was inside. She touched my shoulder and whispered that she was sorry. I just stared at the signature line. His name already signed in blue ink. Confident. Final. Like he'd been planning this moment for months. My hand started shaking so badly, the foreline tugged. I was 42 years old and about to have a hysterectomy. And my husband had just served me divorce papers. My name is Lauren Bishop. I'm 42 years old, married for 16 years to a man I thought I knew. I'd spent the last 3 months in and out of medical clinics. Endless appointments with specialists, blood tests, ultrasounds, preparing for a hysterectomy after 2 devastating miscarriages and a diagnosis I hadn't even told my parents about yet. Endometrial cancer. Stage 1. Caught early but aggressive. The surgery was supposed to remove everything. Give me a chance at surviving. Neil knew all of this. He'd sat in the doctor's office when they explained the procedure. Held my hand when I cried about never having children. Promised he'd be there through everything. But instead of holding my hand through surgery, he'd served me papers. Timed it perfectly so I'd be too weak to fight. Too drugged to argue. Too broken to do anything but sign. The cruelty of it took my breath away, even through the pre-surgery medication, making me drowsy. When my sister Bethany picked me up after surgery, Neil's car was still in the driveway. My suitcase was packed and sitting on the front porch. In the rain. The fabric already soaked through. My clothes probably ruined. His new silver Audi was parked in my usual spot. The spot closest to the door. The one I'd always used because of my back problems. The locks had already been changed. Bethany tried my key 3 times before we understood. He'd planned this down to the minute. Changed the locks while I was in recovery. Packed my things while I was under anesthesia. Made sure I had nowhere to go when I got home. My sister's face went red with anger. She wanted to call the police. File a report. Break a window. But I was too tired. Too sore. Too shocked to do anything but cry while she loaded my wet suitcase into her car. The email arrived the next morning. Subject line: "Let's keep this civil." Like we were negotiating a business deal. Neil had written it like I was a client he was letting go. Professional. Cold. Detached. Let's handle this like adults. No drama. I've spoken to an attorney, and we can make this quick and painless if you cooperate. Then, he had the nerve to ask me to return the wedding ring. Said it was a family heirloom that his grandmother had wanted him to have back. That wasn't true. I had bought that ring. Used my own savings because Neil was between jobs when we got engaged. His family never owned any heirlooms. They rented a house and drove used cars. But he was already rewriting history. Making himself the victim. Making me the villain who'd stolen something precious. I deleted the email without responding. Let him wonder. Let him wait. I had bigger things to worry about than his lies. I found the deleted text messages by accident. Bethany was helping me transfer my phone data to a new device since Neil had cut off our family plan. The recovery software pulled up everything he'd thought was gone forever. Messages to a woman named Sienna. Dating back 6 months. The same 6 months I'd been dealing with symptoms and doctor appointments. One message made my hands shake so badly, I dropped the phone. "Once the surgery is over, I'm out.
I just don't want to look like the bad guy.
Let her recover first, then I'll file." He'd been waiting, calculating, timing his exit for maximum damage while appearing concerned and supportive. He'd sat through appointments, driven me to specialists, held my hand in waiting rooms, all while planning to abandon me the moment I was most vulnerable. The betrayal cut deeper than any surgical incision ever could. A mutual friend called me 2 weeks after surgery. Her name was Hannah. We'd known each other for 10 years through neighborhood gatherings. Her voice was uncomfortable, hesitant. She said she needed to tell me something. That Neil had been talking to their friend group, telling them I'd exaggerated my medical condition to trap him. That I'd faked the severity of everything to guilt him into staying. He said you were always dramatic about health stuff. That you wanted attention. Her voice cracked. But I remembered when you helped me through my mom's cancer.
You're not like that.
I sent her a photo of my surgical discharge notes, the pathology report, the prescription list. She went silent for a long minute, then whispered that she was sorry, that she should have known better. But she never spoke to Neil again after that. And she never replied to my text thanking her for believing me. Some friendships don't survive other people's lies. Neil's son from his previous marriage posted something on social media that destroyed me. Kyle was 19. I'd helped raise him since he was 7 years old. Drove him to soccer practice. Helped with homework. Paid for his therapy after his mother moved across the country. Bought him his first car when he turned 16. Sat through his high school graduation, crying with pride. We'd been close. Or I thought we had been. His post said, "I'm done with fake people pretending to be family. Some people only stick around when it benefits them." The comments were full of support. People calling me out without naming me. Saying I'd used Neil and was now playing victim. Kyle had blocked me before I could respond. Neil had gotten to him first. Painted me as the villain in a story Kyle didn't know the truth about. I was just Dad's wife now. Disposable. Forgettable. Easily replaced by whatever narrative Neil wanted to sell. I went to pick up prescriptions 3 weeks after surgery. Post-operative pain medication and antibiotics. The pharmacist scanned my insurance card and frowned. Scanned it again. Then looked at me, with something close to pity. "Ma'am, this card was declined. The account appears to be closed." My hands went numb. I tried my debit card. Declined. Credit card. Declined. Neil had drained our joint accounts. Every penny we'd saved over 16 years. Our emergency fund. Our checking account. Even the travel savings we'd been building for a dream trip to Ireland. Everything was gone. I had $47 in my wallet. Not enough for the prescriptions I needed. The pharmacist let me have 3 days' worth on credit. Said to come back when I sorted things out. I sat in my car and cried until my surgical incision ached from the pressure. He'd left me with nothing. No home. No money. No way to survive. I moved into Bethany's basement temporarily. She insisted I could stay as long as needed. But the space was unfinished. Cold concrete floors. A furnace with exposed wires that hummed loudly all night. Her 3 cats used my suitcase as a scratching post. I slept on an air mattress that slowly deflated by morning. Every night I woke up on the hard floor with my incision throbbing. But Neil told the court I had voluntarily left the marital home. Made it sound like I'd chosen to abandon our house. No mention of the changed locks. No mention of my rain-soaked suitcase on the porch. No mention that he'd forced me out while I was still recovering from major surgery. His attorney filed a motion claiming I'd forfeited my right to the property by leaving. That I'd made my choice. And the temporary judge seemed to believe him without questioning anything. I had no proof.
No witnesses.
Just my word against his carefully constructed lies. Someone sent me a photo that broke something inside me. An anonymous message from a number I didn't recognize. Neil and Sienna at a luxury resort in Mexico. Palm trees. Infinity pool. Sunset. Her caption read, "She deserves the world," with a ring emoji. But that wasn't what destroyed me. She was wearing my necklace. The delicate gold pendant Neil had given me on our 15th anniversary last year. The one with my birthstone. The one he'd said reminded him of my strength. Now it hung around another woman's neck while she smiled at the camera in paradise. He'd taken her on vacation with our money. Given her my jewelry. Let her play dress up in the life we'd built together. And posted it publicly for everyone to see. Like I'd never existed. Like 16 years meant absolutely nothing. I stared at that photo for hours trying to understand how someone could be this cruel. My attorney's name was Darla Morrison.
No, wait.
Darla Hayes. She was 50-something with sharp eyes and silver hair pulled back tight. She looked over the financial statements Neil's attorney had provided and raised her eyebrows. Tell me again when your surgery was scheduled? I told her. September 15th. She pulled up the divorce filing date. September 14th. Then looked at the bank transactions. Large withdrawals started September 1st. She smiled slowly. The kind of smile that made me understand why people feared good lawyers. He timed this for maximum damage. Drained accounts right before you'd need money for recovery. Filed right before surgery, so you'd be too weak to fight immediately. She tapped her pen against the desk. Let's make it cost him everything he tried to steal. For the first time in weeks, I felt something other than despair. I felt hope. The first court hearing was a nightmare. Neil showed up in a tailored charcoal suit. Expensive shoes. New haircut. Smug smile plastered across his face. Sienna sat in the gallery, wearing a designer dress. They looked like a successful power couple. I showed up in comfortable flats. Loose clothing that didn't press against my healing incision. A compression belt under my shirt. No makeup, because I was still too tired to care. The judge was a tired-looking man in his 60s. He asked Neil directly why he'd filed for divorce the day before his wife's cancer surgery. Neil adjusted his tie and said calmly, I needed closure, Your Honor. The marriage had been over emotionally for years. The timing was unfortunate, but necessary for my mental health. Even the court reporter made a face. The judge wrote something down without expression. Darla squeezed my hand under the table. She'd warned me this first hearing would be rough. That judges needed time to see through lies. I just had to be patient. Darla subpoenaed Neil's business holdings during discovery. His attorney fought it hard. Filed 3 different motions to block access to financial records. That told Darla everything she needed to know. People only hide things when they're guilty. She got court approval and started digging. Found something interesting within a week. Neil had moved substantial assets to an unreported stock account 8 months earlier. Before the divorce. Before my diagnosis. He'd created a shell LLC called Bishop Consulting Group. Moved investments worth over $200,000 into accounts under that company name. Never disclosed them in any financial statements. Guess who used to help him set up business accounts when he was starting his consulting career?
Me.
I knew his patterns. His passwords. His favorite account structures. I'd spent years managing our joint finances while he focused on clients. Now that knowledge became my weapon. Darla smiled when I explained how his mind worked with money. Sienna moved into our house 6 weeks after surgery. I got a notification that someone had changed the alarm code. The security company called asking if I wanted to be removed from the account. I said no.
Keep me on it.
Let me see every time that door opens. Then I checked social media. Sienna had posted photos of her new kitchen. My kitchen. The one I'd renovated 3 years ago. She'd even reupholstered the dining chairs. The ones I'd just finished recovering last year in cream fabric. Now they were teal. Her aesthetic all over my space. Her caption said, New era, new energy with star emojis. Comments filled with congratulations on her beautiful home. Nobody knew she was living in a stolen life. Playing house with someone else's husband in someone else's home. Wearing someone else's jewelry. I screenshot everything. Sent it to Darla. She added it to the growing file labeled Evidence of Dissipation of Marital Assets. Neil claimed he couldn't afford spousal support. Said my medical condition was exaggerated. That I was physically capable of working full-time. His attorney filed a motion saying I was using my diagnosis to manipulate the court into a favorable settlement. The judge ordered an independent medical evaluation. A doctor neither of us had met before. I handed over everything. Every scan. Every blood test. Every surgical note. Every prescription. Pathology reports confirming cancer. Discharge instructions limiting physical activity for 12 weeks minimum. The evaluator was a woman in her 40s who read through everything with increasing concern. She looked up at me finally and asked one question. How long have you been managing this completely alone? Her voice was gentle, full of something like horror. I told her the truth. Since the diagnosis. 3 months of appointments and procedures and fear with nobody holding my hand except my sister. She wrote her report that same day. Concluded, I was severely limited physically. That my condition was serious and ongoing. That I'd need monitoring for years. Neil's claim was medically impossible. Darla found something beautiful in Neil's expense reports. He'd claimed the Mexico trip as a business retreat, deducted it on taxes, submitted receipts to his LLC for reimbursement. She subpoenaed every detail. The resort confirmation, the itemized charges. Everything showed up in discovery. Couples massage, poolside champagne service, romantic dinner for two, one room with a king bed, private beach cabana rental. He'd literally written off his adultery as a business expense. Committed tax fraud while flaunting his affair. The judge's face when Darla presented the evidence was worth every painful day in Bethany's basement. Neil's attorney tried to argue it was an honest mistake, that Neil had mixed up personal and business accounts. But Darla had emails, messages where Neil specifically told his accountant to categorize the trip as professional development. He'd been so arrogant, so sure he'd never get caught, so confident I'd just sign papers and disappear. He'd underestimated what a woman with nothing left to lose could do. I did something I swore I'd never do. I called Neil directly, used Bethany's phone so he wouldn't ignore it, asked if we could talk privately. One conversation before everything became final. Maybe find a way to end this with less destruction. He was quiet for a moment. Then his voice came through cold and sharp. There's nothing to talk about, Lauren. You were holding me back. I need someone who can keep up with my lifestyle. Someone who isn't always sick or tired or depressed about babies we'll never have. Each word was designed to hurt, to remind me of every failure, every loss, every way my body had betrayed us both. I hung up without saying goodbye. Bethany found me crying on her basement steps. I told her what he'd said. She held me while I finally grieved. Not for the marriage. That was already dead. But for the years I'd wasted believing his lies. That night I deleted his number. Blocked him everywhere. Never tried to reach out again. Some people don't deserve your mercy. Darla ordered an independent appraisal of our house. Neil's attorney had valued it at $400,000. The price we'd paid 12 years ago. Darla suspected that was wrong. The appraiser came back with news that changed everything. The house was now worth $630,000. The neighborhood had exploded in value. New developments, better schools, updated infrastructure. Neil had been undervaluing our primary asset by over $200,000, trying to cheat me out of my fair share. When the judge read the correct appraisal figure in court, Neil's face went pale, then bright red, then almost purple. He'd been so sure his number would stand, so confident nobody would question him. His attorney scrambled, tried to argue the appraisal was inflated. But Darla had 3 comparable sales from the last 6 months, all supporting the higher value. I was entitled to half, plus compensation for being forced out. The numbers suddenly weren't in Neil's favor anymore. Sienna tried to reach out to me directly. Sent a message through a mutual acquaintance since I'd blocked her everywhere. None of this was personal. Neil said you two were basically over. That you'd been separated emotionally for years. I didn't know about the surgery timing. I'm sorry if I caused you pain. I stared at that message for a long time.
Part of me wanted to respond.
To tell her exactly what Neil had done. How he'd planned this. Used her. Would probably do the same to her eventually. But I didn't respond. Just screenshot the message. Sent it to Darla. Her reply was immediate. Perfect. This shows she knew he was married. Undermines any claim she's an innocent party. The message became Exhibit 17 in our case. Proof that Neil had been planning his exit while lying to everyone involved. Sienna probably thought she was apologizing. Instead, she'd just handed me another weapon. Sometimes karma works in unexpected ways. Darla found a fatal flaw in the prenuptial agreement. Neil had insisted on one when we got married 16 years ago. He'd been starting his consulting business, worried about protecting his future earnings. I'd been hurt but signed it. The prenup said anything earned during the marriage would be split 60-40 in his favor.
It had seemed reasonable then.
Now it was supposed to protect him. Except Darla noticed something. The notary signature was missing from one page. The page outlining the financial split. Without proper notarization on every page, the entire document was legally questionable. She filed a motion to invalidate it. Neil's attorney fought back hard, claimed it was a technicality, an oversight. But the law was clear. Prenuptial agreements required specific formalities. Miss one, and the whole thing could fall apart. The judge took 3 weeks to rule. Finally decided the prenup was unenforceable. Everything would be split 50-50 under standard divorce law. Neil's last shield was gone. He'd have to face equal division of everything we'd built. Neil had made another critical error. He'd registered part of his consulting business using our marital address. Listed me as a silent co-founder on the original LLC paperwork from 10 years ago. My name was on documents filed with the state. But after we separated, he'd filed amendments removing my name, transferring full ownership to himself. Without my signature, without my knowledge, without my consent. That was fraud. Business fraud. Possibly criminal. Darla flagged it for the judge. Requested a full forensic audit of Neil's business dealings. His attorney tried to claim it was an honest mistake, that I'd verbally agreed to be removed. But there was no documentation, no signed forms, no evidence I'd consented to anything. The judge ordered the business frozen until the audit was complete. Neil couldn't access business accounts, couldn't take on new clients, couldn't operate at all. His income stopped immediately. Suddenly, he couldn't afford his expensive lawyer, couldn't maintain his lifestyle, couldn't take Sienna on weekend trips. The walls were closing in, and he was finally feeling pressure. The final court hearing was nothing like the first one. Neil stood up to speak, started his practice speech about fairness and moving forward. The judge cut him off mid-sentence. Mr. Bishop, I've reviewed all submitted documents, the financial records, the medical reports, the timeline of events. The evidence paints a very different picture than your previous testimony. His voice was cold, professional, angry underneath. You attempted to weaponize timing against your spouse during a legitimate medical crisis. You drained marital accounts. You undervalued assets. You committed business fraud. And you've shown no remorse throughout these proceedings. The courtroom was dead silent.
Neil tried to speak.
The judge held up his hand. Sit down, Mr. Bishop. I've heard enough from you. Neil sat, finally quiet, finally understanding he'd lost. Sienna wasn't in the gallery anymore. She'd stopped coming to hearings 3 weeks ago, when the money problem started, when reality set in, when she realized she'd bet on the wrong man. The judge's ruling was everything Darla had fought for. He awarded me 70% of all marital assets based on Neil's fraudulent behavior. Full ownership of the house since he'd illegally forced me out. Back payment for all medical expenses I'd covered alone, including surgery costs. Reimbursement for the money he'd drained from our accounts. Full payment of my attorney fees. Compensation for emotional distress caused by his timing and actions. Ongoing spousal support for 5 years while I recovered and rebuilt my career. Neil looked at his attorney in shock. His lawyer just shook his head. There was no appeal for this. No technicality to exploit. The evidence was overwhelming. Neil had destroyed his own case with his arrogance. He'd documented everything. Saved messages. Made paper trails. Been so confident he'd win that he'd never covered his tracks properly. Now, it was costing him everything. He looked toward the gallery where Sienna used to sit. The seat was empty. She'd already moved on. Already found someone else with money and stability.
He was alone now.
Just like he'd left me. I wrote a letter after the final ruling. Not to send to Neil. Not to mail or deliver.
Just to write.
To close the chapter properly. You tried to leave me broken. Took everything you could carry. Changed locks. Drained accounts. Rewrote history to make me the villain. You thought I'd crumble. Sign papers quietly. Disappear into whatever narrative you'd created. But I walked into that courtroom healed. Stronger than you ever knew I could be. And you walked out hollow. Empty of everything you'd tried to steal. You taught me what betrayal looks like. I taught you what underestimating someone costs. I read it aloud in Bethany's basement, then burned it in her fireplace. Watched the paper curl and blacken and disappear into ash. Some words don't need to be sent. They just need to be spoken into the universe. Released.
Let go.
I slept better that night than I had in months. The nightmares finally stopped. The anger finally loosened its grip. I was free. I got the keys to my house back on a cold November morning, 6 months after surgery. For months after Neil had changed the locks and thrown me out, the locksmith met me there. Changed everything again. New locks. New codes. New beginning. I walked through the empty rooms slowly. Sienna had taken everything when she left. Furniture. Decorations. Even the curtains. The house was bare. But it was mine. Completely mine. I stood in the kitchen where I'd cooked 1,000 meals. Where I'd laughed and cried and dreamed of children who'd never come. Poured myself a glass of wine from a bottle Bethany had given me. Toasted to survival.
To strength.
To the future I'd build alone. For the first time in 16 years, I wasn't waiting for anyone to come home. I was already there. Already whole. Already enough. The house was empty, but I wasn't. I was full of possibilities. Full of peace. Full of myself again. And that was more than enough to start over.